Yoshinobu Yamamoto has faced pressure before. Not the simulated pressure of spring training games or the manageable pressure of regular season matchups where the stakes exist but the consequences are survivable. Real pressure. The kind that arrives in October when the margin for error collapses to nothing and every pitch carries the accumulated weight of an entire season behind it. The kind that forged him in Japan across years of performance that made his eventual arrival in America feel less like a transition and more like an inevitability. He knows what it feels like to carry a game. To be the person the dugout looks to when everything depends on the next pitch being the right one. To absorb that weight and convert it into something useful rather than something paralyzing. He knows all of that. And none of it prepared him for Tuesday night. 6 runs. 6 innings. Numbers that look stark in a box score and feel even starker when you are the one who produced them, when you are standing on a mound in the 6th inning watching a run score that you could not prevent, knowing that the person who will be called to the mound in the next 60 seconds is coming not to encourage you but to end your evening, and knowing that what you are handing to your bullpen is a deficit that your offense may or may not be able to overcome. He had given up 6 runs. In 6 innings. Against a lineup he had studied. Against a team he had faced before. Against hitters whose tendencies he knew and whose weaknesses he had exploited in previous outings and whose adjustments to those exploitations he had failed, on this particular night, to counter in time. It was the worst start of his season. By every measure that matters, runs allowed, quality of contact, efficiency of pitch usage, the fundamental question of whether the pitcher controlled the game or the game controlled the pitcher, it was the night that Yoshinobu Yamamoto would least want anyone to remember. It was also the night that produced something nobody expected. Something that began with 6 words from Shohei Ohtani and ended with Dave Roberts standing in a dugout corridor with his eyes doing something that the people around him had rarely seen them do. The 6th inning unraveled in the specific way that bad innings unravel for pitchers who are too good for what is happening to them to feel accidental. The first run had scored in the 3rd. A home run on a fastball that caught too much of the plate, the kind of mistake that elite pitchers make once every several outings and that, on most nights, represents an isolated concession rather than the beginning of a pattern. Yamamoto had responded to that home run the way he always responds to adversity, by going back to work, by narrowing his focus to the next batter, by refusing to allow one bad pitch to become the story of the evening. But the pattern had continued. Quietly at first. A walk that shouldn't have happened. A single on a pitch that his catcher had set up correctly and that Yamamoto had executed incorrectly by the smallest possible margin, a margin invisible to most observers but immediately apparent to anyone who understood the difference between where that pitch was supposed to go and where it actually went. By the 5th inning, the deficit was 4. By the time Roberts made his way to the mound in the 6th, slowly, with the particular deliberateness of a manager who is giving his pitcher every last second of dignity before making the call that neither of them wants to make, it was 6. Roberts didn't say much on the mound. He rarely does in these moments. He reached out and took the ball with the quiet, respectful directness of someone who has done this enough times to understand that efficiency is its own form of kindness. He said something in Yamamoto's ear that was too quiet for the microphones to capture. Yamamoto nodded once. And then he walked off the mound. What happened next is what nobody was prepared for. He didn't go to the dugout immediately. The normal choreography of a pitcher being removed, the walk from the mound, the descent of the dugout steps, the retreat to the bench or the tunnel depending on the pitcher's preference, did not occur. Yamamoto reached the dugout entrance and stopped. He stood there for a moment, facing the field, watching the reliever complete his warm-up tosses with the focused attention of someone who is not simply waiting but is doing something specific with the time. Then he turned around. And walked to where Ohtani was sitting. This is the moment that Roberts, watching from the top step of the dugout, described afterward as the moment that caught him completely off guard. Because Yamamoto approaching Ohtani after being taken out of a game, after his worst outing of the season, in the specific raw vulnerability of those first minutes after a difficult performance, was not something that fit the established patterns of how either man behaves in the dugout. Yamamoto is private with his difficulties. He processes them internally, visibly working through things within himself rather than reaching outward. Ohtani, For all the warmth that the people around him describe when speaking about the private version of him that the public rarely sees, does not typically insert himself into a teammate's difficult moment uninvited. He reads the room. He understands what people need and whether what they need is space or presence, and he calibrates accordingly. On Tuesday night, Yamamoto made the choice for both of them. He sat down next to Ohtani. And he said, in Japanese, in the quiet of a dugout that was focused on the field rather than on the two men at the end of the bench, something that amounted to, I need to know what you saw. Not what went wrong. Not reassurance that it would be better next time. Not the comfortable language of encouragement that teammates offer each other as social currency in difficult moments. What did you see? What Ohtani said in response is what Yamamoto revealed publicly for the first time, not in a formal press conference, not through a prepared statement, but in a conversation with a Japanese journalist whose relationship with both players goes back to their time in Japan, and whose account of the conversation carries the particular credibility of someone who had earned the trust that made it possible. Ohtani looked at Yamamoto for a moment before answering. Then he said, your release point moved in the third inning and you never found it again. 6 words. Technical. Precise. Delivered without softening or preamble or the cushioning language that most people instinctively apply when telling someone something difficult. Your release point moved in the third inning and you never found it again. Yamamoto sat with those words for a moment. Not because they surprised him, he had felt something shift, had been chasing the correction through the fourth and fifth innings without being able to identify precisely what he was chasing. But because hearing it stated that directly, with that clarity, from the person saying it, produced something different from what he had expected to feel. Not shame. Not the compounding of an already difficult evening into something heavier. Relief. The specific relief of a problem named. Of a cause identified. Of the difference between carrying a bad outing as a general failure and carrying it as a specific mechanical issue with a specific mechanical solution. He had not failed. He had lost his release point in the third inning and been unable to recover it. Those are different things. They feel different. They lead to different places. Ohtani had given him that distinction in 6 words. But the 6 words were not everything Ohtani said. What came after them, and this is the part that left people speechless when Yamamoto recounted it, the part that traveled through the baseball community and arrived places that technical pitching analysis does not typically reach, was something different in register but connected in purpose. After the release point, Ohtani paused. And then he said something that Yamamoto rendered in the journalist's account with careful attention to the exact phrasing, because the exact phrasing mattered. He said, the fact that you gave up 6 runs and stayed in 6 innings tells me more about you than any of your good starts do. Yamamoto looked at him. Ohtani continued. Most pitchers, when a start goes the way yours went tonight, when the third inning produces what your third inning produced, find a way to give the manager the decision earlier. They find a way to make the call easier. They give up the 7th run in the 4th and the conversation happens faster and everyone goes home with a cleaner story. You stayed. You competed for 6 innings when you had nothing. That is not a failure. That is the thing that tells me what kind of pitcher you are when everything else has been taken away. He paused. Then, we will fix the release point tomorrow morning. But I already know the other thing is not broken. Yamamoto, recounting this conversation to the journalist, stopped speaking for several seconds at this point in the account. The journalist, who has conducted hundreds of interviews with professional athletes across 2 countries, said that the silence lasted long enough that he considered whether to prompt Yamamoto to continue. Then Yamamoto said, I had not expected that. I had expected the technical part. I had not expected the other part. He paused again. I have played alongside many good players. I have been told many things by many people after bad starts. But I have never had someone see both things at the same time, the mechanical problem and the character underneath it, and say both of them without making one feel more important than the other. That is what Ohtani does, he said. He sees the whole thing. Not just the performance. The whole thing. Roberts heard about the conversation the following morning. Not from Ohtani. Not from Yamamoto. From a staff member who had been at the end of the dugout during the exchange, close enough to observe the body language, close enough to understand the emotional weight of what was happening, not close enough to hear the words. The words came to Roberts later, through the account that eventually reached the journalist. He read them in the same form that everyone else read them, in translation, in the careful reconstruction of what had been said in a language he doesn't speak, about a moment he had witnessed from 40 feet away without fully understanding what it contained. He was asked about it at his next media availability. Whether he had seen what happened in the dugout. Whether he had known, in that moment, what was occurring between the two men at the end of his bench. Roberts was quiet for a moment. "I saw Yoshi walk to Shohei," he said. "I saw them sit together. I didn't hear what was said." He paused. "But I saw Yoshi's face when he stood up. And I thought, whatever just happened there, it was the right thing." A reporter asked, "What did you see in his face?" Roberts looked down briefly. When he looked back up, something in his own expression had shifted, the particular movement of a face that is managing something it didn't expect to be managing in a public setting. "I saw a pitcher who had walked in carrying the worst start of his season," Roberts said, "and was walking out carrying something different." He stopped there. Cleared his throat once. "That doesn't happen by accident," he said. "That happens because of the specific person he walked to." The room noticed what was happening in Roberts' eyes. Nobody mentioned it directly. But several reporters who were present described it afterward in their accounts of the press conference, the moment when Dave Roberts, who has managed baseball games at the highest level for a decade and has seen most of what this sport is capable of producing in a human being, sat in front of a room full of journalists and was visibly moved by a conversation he hadn't even heard. By what it had done to a young pitcher's face. By the person responsible for doing it. Yamamoto started his next game 5 days later. His release point was where it was supposed to be from the first pitch of the first inning. The mechanical correction had been made, in the morning session Ohtani had referenced, working side by side in the bullpen with the quiet, methodical focus of two people solving a specific problem because the problem has a solution and the solution is worth finding. He pitched 7 innings. He allowed 1 run. He struck out 9. After the game, a reporter asked him if Tuesday night felt distant now. If the worst start of his season already seemed like something from a different chapter. Yamamoto thought about it for a moment. "It doesn't feel distant," he said. "I think about it. I think I will think about it for a long time." The reporter waited. "But when I think about it now," Yamamoto continued, "what I think about is not the 6 runs. What I think about is the end of the bench. And what was said there." He paused. "That is a better thing to carry than 6 runs."